You're listening to Bottomshelf Bitcoin. This is episode 34.
Relax. Enjoy your coffee. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Take a chill pill. What is it? Okay.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bottomshelf Bitcoin, the podcast that puts Bitcoin knowledge within everyone's reach. As always, I'm your host, Josh Humphrey, and today my guest is Clark Moody, which is pretty cool. You were the first person I ever interviewed on this show, so I thought for 10 years that'd be appropriate that I get you back on.
I'm glad to be back.
So, let's see. Also, you're the only person I've ever had live actual in-person recording with, so this is fun. So 10 years now. Well, if you guys haven't listened to, I don't know what episode that was, like 10 or 11, I don't know, I'll put it in the show notes. We're not going to rehash your origin story. We've done that before on the show, so go back and listen to that episode. But currently you are working at Picks and Shovels, and then you also have your exchange tracker and your street price indicator. So again, I'll put links to those in the show notes. Y'all go check those out. But yeah, so 10 years. What's it seems crazy. 10 years. What are your like favorite stories or fondest memories over the last 10 years?
Well, I've only been in Bitcoin since 2011, so it's more like
Okay.
seven-ish, coming up on eight years for me. But I think, I don't know, the best thing about the space is just, it's probably the memes. It's probably the sense of humor and the just the creativity out there. You know, this is serious stuff, but the amount, the dynamicism and the memes and the GIFs and everything are just out of control. And that's probably the most fun part about it. You know, what we're trying to do with the Bitcoin space is detach money from the state, which is a very, very serious undertaking. And to see humor added to it along the way is just fantastic. I also love what Nick Carter did with the FUD dice.
Yeah.
Since literally the second reply to Satoshi, or the second thread on the original cryptography mailing list, was about the energy usage of proof of work. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. All the threads, every time there's naysayers about Bitcoin, it's always, it doesn't scale, it's too volatile, it's energy inefficient, what happens when the block reward stops. All of the arguments you've heard a million times have been there from the beginning.
Yeah. And
so it's become, you know, our job as kind of this core group of supporters is just to continually fight the good fight, dispel FUD. My co-founder Dan Held has been doing a great job with that in some of his articles out there and tweet storms, dispelling FUD, and others in the space, of course. And so, you know, where we are now is this: there's enough people looking at Bitcoin that these detractors, you know, need to be addressed in order to kind of push past the next level of adoption, perhaps. So, I don't know.
So, okay, which brand of FUD or which side of the dice is like particularly triggering for you?
Well, I don't know. The most triggered I got probably in the past year was some guy tweeted that society doesn't owe you a stable store of value, or something to that effect. And that triggered me so hard, about society owing the individual something, which is just so wrong. And just the idea that, like, you have no choice but to have your energy stolen away from you through inflation. because you owe it to society, or society hasn't granted you this privilege to some extent. It's so backwards and wrong. I mean, think about it. It makes sense to, like, a 2-year-old. You get one more block, you put the blocks in your, toy chest, and you expect tomorrow that both blocks are going to be in your toy chest. Yet we forget these just basics of human decency and common sense with this grown up financial system we find ourselves in. And then you have all of the court economists and the apologists in the mainstream media and academia towing the line for the state as far as inflation goes. And so you have this thing called Bitcoin that comes along, and there's nothing you can do. You can't point a gun at Bitcoin and tell it to inflate its money supply past the mathematical curve built in. And I think that's very, very troubling for a lot of postmodern type people, because it's this source of truth outside of their control, and it defies their reality.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can do. So, tough, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of mindset is used to being able to either whine or protest or whatever enough to force somebody to do their bidding.
And there are three main attacks that I see coming for Bitcoin. The first is, of course, the energy usage. So you'll have governments imposing all sorts of restrictions on mining because it wastes energy, which is false. And the environmental sentiment is a very, very popular political rhetoric right now. If you can pitch anything in terms of environmentalism, then you can get popular support for it. So I think attacking mining on environmental grounds is probably the first major political attack against Bitcoin. The second would be wealth inequality. So it's just unfair that all of you people were, early in on Bitcoin, and it's unfair that you got it before everyone else. And so we need to forcibly redistribute the Bitcoin. Even though, look, we're at hopefully the bottom of a bear market. It's lasted about a year. This is late 2018. And there have been multiple drawdowns like this before where a lot of people got washed out. And so a lot of longtime holders bailed out and sold. And so you can't say with a straight face that, if I had bought Bitcoin back in, 2011, that you would still have anywhere near the amount that you bought.
No.
You might have sold the first time it went 10x, or the second time it went 10x, or the third time it went 10x.
Right. Yeah. I remember, I don't know, was it last summer? 2017, I guess. It's hard because I feel like this whole space moves at such a breakneck speed, and like development and like you said, like memes, and it moves on Twitter. So it's easy to forget how long ago things were. And I came to you because that was really, I guess this would have been shortly before the hard fork, before I really like forced myself to go back and actually learn all this stuff. And so I looked at the price and I said, what's going on? It just keeps going up. And I really wanted to sell, but then at the same time, like it just kept going up, and I was like, maybe not. So
yeah, I think the third attack will come from the inflationists who, as Bitcoin starts to gain much more mainstream adoption, they'll say, this doesn't allow us to inflate the money supply. There are major problems. We need to force a hard fork to add permanent inflation, 3% a year, or some sort of exponential money supply growth. And the inflationists have been at their game since, the 1700s. They've tried all sorts of inflationary schemes. France in the 1700s, and John Law and all these guys, they always break. They always enrich the insiders and hurt the mass of the public, and that's just the way it's supposed to work. But again, Bitcoin relies on distributed consensus. There's no center issuer of the money, and so there's no one to squeeze. And so separating from money from state is the core thing here, and it's why the system is so complex. But I think there's hope. as long as enough people that are running the Bitcoin software agree that it should stay the way it is, then it will. I know my node will not go to any sort of inflationary fork, and we can hard fork our difficulty down if we need to, but it's opt-in money, and no one can force you to change without coming to your house, right?
Right.
So,
and they would have to come to every person's house. It
Right.
just the asymmetry of what it would cost to carry out such an attack. I think this is what frustrates me is the, like you said earlier, like the people who are crying about this unfair advantage and yada yada. Like the current system with inflation is what's unfair, or I say fair. Let's not use fair, because fair is like, I'm not looking for an equal distribution. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think it needs to happen. But keeping people from being able to advance where they're at is what the current system does, and that's Bitcoin is the opposite of that. And so, like, stopping inflation and having a predictable pattern of growth gives that opportunity. And so the people who would most benefit from that are the people who have been dealt a quote unquote unfair hand by the current system. That's
Right.
that's what I want people to get, but it's so hard and frustrating sometimes to make people understand that.
Yeah, and I didn't really necessarily mean to lead off negative in this conversation, but Bitcoin is an adversarial system, and you have to think about attack vectors for this thing to survive. I think a lot of the other crypto projects out there are very optimistic and really not thinking about any sort of adversarial setup. One thing that 2018 really brought to the table is sort of the content creators and the intellectual bulwark and framework needed to sell Bitcoin on more intellectual grounds and not just technical grounds. You started a podcast, which is a shining beacon of hope within the podcasting realm. But others, shout out Noted, shout out Marty Bent, shout out Peter McCormick. You guys are doing great stuff with your content that's going out. Shout out Bitcoin in Markets. Ansel's been on this podcast.
Stephen Levera.
Yep. And so just all of these guys are putting out high quality content with lots of interesting people and really providing intellectual ammunition for this movement. I'm still looking forward to the manifesto from Bitcoin Sign Guy. Whenever that comes out, I'll be eating that up.
We had the Bitcoin Standard from Saifedean.
Bitcoin Standard,
which is really good. Have you read the Iterative Capital thesis? It's like so long.
I've had that open in a tab for like 3 months. And
Cryptoconomy. Oh, that's another one. Cryptoconomy. He reads it. It's like 9 episodes, but I just finished it. So that's a really good piece too.
Yeah. I think what I'll say about the Bitcoin Standard is we have The Ethics of Money Production from Guido Holtzman, which was a 2008 book. And it's much more academic and less opinionated than the Bitcoin Standard. I feel like we need one more iteration of a synthesis of those two books. A shorter piece that refines what's in the ethics of money production in terms of Bitcoin. And I'm still working my way through that one. It's much more technical, and you might say palatable to a wider audience. Saifedean's going to trigger a lot of people with his book, which is fine, and a lot of Bitcoiners love it. If you're already on the same team, but we may need one more iteration of some sort of book length treatment of Bitcoin that comes at a much more say measured approach and less opinionated. But that'll come, and all of these things are great additions to the space, providing this intellectual bulwark really against the FUD and against the naysayers, but also convincing people that this is good stuff.
Have you read Hasu's Bitcoin? I don't remember what it's called. It's like approaching Bitcoin as a skeptic or something like that. I haven't yet. It's on the list.
I have not either.
Okay. So you mentioned the memes. What are some of your favorites?
I love the Saving Private Ryan meme when the
Jim BTC.
Jim BTC.
You're awesome.
Shout out Jim. The bag, the ICO bag is the flamethrower that explodes, and like little bits of ETH like shower all over Tom Hanks. It's just it's out of control. I love the trading memes. The Bitcoin pizza day meme, or the GIF where the guy wants to place an order on pizza and it's little BitMEX order not accepted little red box popping up. The OK Coin wood chipper that the side of the trading platform opens and just dumps everyone's orders into a wood chipper. And I don't know. I like the idea of noobs getting wrecked trading is kind of a Schadenfreude type thing where it's like, yes, they're losing lots of money, but it's also a rite of passage.
Yeah.
You have to get wrecked if you trade Bitcoin. The market has to take you through the path of maximum pain before it emerges out the backside, with another order of magnitude improvement in price. So it turns traders into hodlers.
Yeah.
Long term, when you've been around as long as I have in the space, and the first day I looked at Bitcoin, it was $1, and so all of the headlines about Bitcoin off 85% from its highs or whatever. It's like it's still, where are we at? 3,500 around today?
Something like that.
It's 3,500 times the price that I first saw it. I mean, it's just, and then people before me saw it at half of a penny was like the first trade for Bitcoin. So it's like, that's another 200 X. So it's just perspective. And the more you pay attention to CNBC and things like that, the more you're going to get wrecked. You're going to get scared, or you're going to get greedy. But if you're thinking about investing in this thing, take the long view. Just look back at where it's been, and ignore the day-to-day CNBC garbage. Ignore all the altcoins. We've seen waves of altcoins come and go. There have been multiple phases of this thing. I've still got some Prime coin, pump my bags, some Pure coin from back in the day, and those things are worth nothing now. Yeah. And a lot of the ICOs we've seen are down 99.5%. So they need a huge gain to come back. We've seen that forks don't work.
Yeah.
Litecoin has flippened the Bitcoin Cash forks. They are now below Litecoin on the market cap, or at least they were last time I saw a little screen cap. So we've seen lots of things that don't work.
Yeah.
And I think over time, more and more people just come around. It's like Bitcoin, Bitcoin keeps trucking along. Other networks are getting 51% attacked and having huge price crashes that are almost irrecoverable. Bitcoin's been down 90% before, but never more than 90 to 95%. Like 99.5% is you need like a 2000x or something to come back, or something like that. So
what's your thought on the 51% attacks? Like, good, bad?
I think good actors in the space should actively 51% attack alt chains to teach the exchanges a lesson about listing a bunch of garbage chains. I think it'd be, this is a distributed consensus system. Just because you have one confirmation doesn't really mean much, especially if if you have fast block times. You need to look at total work added to that chain. It's that layers of amber. It's that stack of stones. If the pyramids in Egypt were 3 feet tall, they wouldn't be there.
Right.
They're a giant, huge, billion tons of rock stacked on top of something to keep it there through the ages. And so, 6 confirmations on Bitcoin with 10-minute blocks is an hour worth of work added to the system. 6 confirmations on some chain with 1-minute blocks with, 1/millionth the hash rate of Bitcoin, or 1/millionth the energy expenditure. That's not much security at all. And so I think the exchanges need to learn a lesson about listing these chains. I think we need good citizen miners to attack these chains actively all the time. And so the exchanges start losing money on listing garbage. And I think that's the best way to flush out bad technology and bad chains out of the space.
Of course, there's also specifically with SHA-256 chains like SV or ABC. Now that's an opportunity cost for them. They're losing the ability to, the time and effort and energy that they're putting into attacking those other chains is potential profit lost on Bitcoin. So
that's right. And the only reason people mine those chains, so part of the reason you see hash rate leave Bitcoin to go mine the forks is because they're more profitable in the near term with price action. But large and deep reorgs will teach, you lose way more money with a huge reorg than you would with the little bit you would gain off of a couple blocks. So I'd love to see a big spectacular 300 block reorg on SV or something. I know that ABC stuck in a checkpoint which centralizes it even further, and they've been accordingly punished in the market.
Yeah.
But the actors in this space, the best lesson is to lose massive amounts of money and be punished for bad behavior by the market.
Right.
So I think both the promoters of these chains and the exchanges listing these chains should be punished for bad behavior. And the most effective way is to lose lots of money.
Who would you say are good actors from a like these big companies, exchanges kind of level? Like, we could spend time talking about bad actors, but who are good actors, in your opinion?
I don't know about. So exchanges are really kind of mercenaries.
Sure.
They just want to list stuff that people will trade. I think that the bad actors have revealed themselves through the whole Segwit 2x fiasco, and the good actors mainly stayed silent. There's all sorts of companies building sweet technology for the Bitcoin tech stack itself. Recently, Casa's making a lot of noise with their node. Samurai Wallet, of course. Just chugging along with amazing innovation all the time.
Yeah.
For on-chain privacy. Really looking forward to their Dojo node coming out, so you can self-host your Samurai backend. Blockstream just launched their satellite, like global coverage on the satellite, and an API, so you can push data through the satellites, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's the cool new.
They don't own the satellites, but one more Bitcoin bull market, and we'll have companies launching satellites themselves.
Right.
We'll get the infrastructure there. Bitcoin 100,000, Bitcoin 150,000 would really allow a lot of these companies to put some really solid infrastructure down, or up in space, as it were. Anybody else out there who's doing just good work, the Optech newsletter on just like upgrade your nodes, check this out on how to batch. Here's a great article on UTXO management, like all this stuff, just allowing companies to improve their infrastructure around Bitcoin, and then the companies that are actually building the tech and sponsoring core devs to build tech. Everybody in the Lightning space is just going crazy. Like, the mailing list is completely out of control with all sorts of crazy stuff happening on Lightning. And that's a gateway in for developers big time, because Lightning has much, much less cognitive overhead to deal with than the main chain. A Lightning payment is done, and it's done, and the protocol handles the rest. A Bitcoin payment is eventual consensus, and you need proof of work, and you need time. So anybody in the Lightning space is doing great work right now, just building UX, building apps. We've seen a lot of deplatforming of controversial, quote unquote controversial, which means politically incorrect voices out there. And so hopefully we'll see. We have what's the Patreon alternative? Oh goodness, one sec.
Tallycoin?
Tallycoin. I think that's it. I haven't actually looked at Tallycoin.
Oh,
but I think it's a Patreon alternative, right? Or crowd.
yeah. It's crowdfunding. I've got one set up, but I haven't looked at it in a while. I think he's put out several updates since the last time I went in and messed with it. So,
right.
that was kind of during that month that I was face down in a book trying to get school finished for the semester.
Yeah. So if you have Tallycoin out there, if you have potentially self-hosted Patreon alternatives that enable Lightning, that people have talked about Lightning subscriptions, like you create 5 or 10 invoices at a time, and then your app prompts you to pay them every month. Just replicate the functionality of Patreon, which is gated content for subscribers, private RSS feeds, that every time your podcaster pings that RSS feed, then the server checks that if you're still subscribed, and if you are, then it sends you the latest content. All you need is just to chop US dollars out of Patreon, make it self-hosted so it's not censorable. You could offer a WordPress model where you've got you can pay for hosting, but just get people off of the fiat money system, which is centrally controlled and subject to political whims. You've got Gab out there championing Bitcoin. I don't know if they're doing Lightning or what they're doing with Bitcoin, but they're pushing it to millions and millions of users who are already exiles from the political correctness of the mainstream system.
Here's my beef with Gab, and maybe they just missed things that I was seeing, because I don't want to beat up on them too much because I do appreciate what they're doing. It was frustrating. Let me say it that way. It was frustrating for me to watch them get deplatformed and then continue repeatedly to go to centralized payment systems. And it just was and I feel like in the comments people were saying use BTC Pay Server, use whatever, use Bitcoin. And I think they're for Bitcoin. So like I said, I don't want to beat up on them too much, but it was frustrating for me to watch them repeatedly go through this process. But I don't know, maybe that was good because we could see all these different, maybe in the long run it was good because we can see all these different services that eventually they will boot you if they don't like you. So I don't know, maybe it was good for them to go through that process. Yeah,
well, what we the lesson from Gab will show other services and the users what uncensorable money actually means. Money that's not subject to political whims.
Yeah.
And so it was Gab. Gab had to fumble in the dark for who knows how long to finally come around to really liking the idea of Bitcoin. We'll see if it works for them. But now they've just shown the light for other people to follow.
Yeah.
So they're blazing the trail here, and I'm sure people, when Gab was first announced, I don't know, was it 2 years ago or something? I'm sure people were like, hey, you should use Bitcoin for this. And whatever,
Yeah.
So it's taken this pain for them to finally come around and realize what censorship in your money is and what it means. So yeah, I think it'll be good in the long run.
Oh, I do too in the long run. It just, like I said, in the short term, it was frustrating for me to watch them go through that. And I was just banging my head against the wall, a move immediately to the decentralized acceptance. But you know what? They're on it now. So, good on Gab. I think churches should start accepting Bitcoin. I think politically that's potentially where we're headed, especially state to state. You're going to get issues where local and state authorities try to shut down church practices. We saw that a couple years ago in Houston. The mayor of Houston tried to subpoena pastors who were speaking out against homosexuality.
Right.
And my understanding is that anybody who had their sermon notes and things like that stored on Google Drive, Google just handed them over.
Right.
And actually Microsoft was the one, surprisingly, who said, you can't do that. You're going to need like some proper legal frameworks if you want this information.
We have this thing called due process.
Right.
No, Europe and Canada have hate speech laws, and I could see those being applied if they aren't already to churches. Then, of course, you just have, elsewhere in the world when you have state religion, of course, you need when say a Christian church is illegal, in some other country, then of course you need uncensorable money there to help fund that effort. So, yeah, for sure. And we definitely need a broader cultural shift around privacy.
Yeah, 100% agree.
People say, if I don't have anything to hide,
if you're not doing anything wrong,
I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't have anything to hide.
Right.
Is so backwards, really, from the attitude and mindset of the American people for the first 100 years of the Republic. It's incredible what a century of statism will do to the culture of the people.
Do you close the bathroom door? Like, do you lock your house up at night? Like, that's how we should be viewing this. Like, it's not that you have anything necessarily bad, but it's about controlling who has that information.
Yep. And it's funny, a lot of public school kids have to read 1984. But, just like every other thing you're forced to read in school, you don't ever actually care about it or like it because you're forced to do it. So, one of my favorite MAGA hats is "Make Orwell Fiction Again."
Yeah.
It's probably that's probably. There's also "Make Bitcoin Great Again," but that's. I don't think that's as pithy.
Yeah, that's a little on the nose.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1984, man. The scary. I didn't read it in high school. I read it after college. Actually, I think it just took me a while to get around to it. And I think the scariest thing for me is in the version that I read, there's an appendix at the end, or an epilogue maybe, and it's talking about how they would shift the words that were able to be used. They would cut words out of the dictionary for the next edition and refine, so it was very difficult to transfer ideas because you didn't have words for them. And like that's it's so true. When I look around, it's just scary.
If you're getting in a political debate out there, define words before you even start. Because one person says racism, let's say, and another person has a different definition of that word.
Right.
And you need to agree on the definition of that word before you can even call somebody a racist or determine if something is racist or not. Likewise with, fairness and equality and all these things, liberty, freedom. A lot of people equate freedom, I think maybe Woodrow Wilson started this. History buffs, correct me if I'm wrong, but the progressive era kicked off the idea that freedom means freedom, freedom in your means to do what you want. As far as if you don't have health care paid for by somebody and you get sick, then you're not free to pursue your goals. Therefore, having health care is part of freedom. Which is, they're not using the word liberty, thankfully. And even the word liberal has been twisted over the last century and a half to be very much not about individual liberty, like it used to be in the days of John Locke, let's say. So, yeah, watch your words. Watch that the words you're using actually mean what the other person thinks they mean, or you're not going to get anything done in any sort of political discussion at all.
Come to a Schelling point on what you believe those words mean.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. So what are you, we kind of touched on this, but like, what are you most excited for in the near term? Let's say 1 to 3 years.
I think, so we're at, somewhat of a bottom in the bear market, coming off of late 2017, early 2018 highs. And if history repeats itself, this is the time when it takes, 18 months for the price to slowly inch back up, which means that nobody's looking at the price. And that's the time that people are building infrastructure And so when the next wave of interest comes into Bitcoin, there will be another order of magnitude of infrastructure available to absorb that wave. I think Lightning is the primary example of this, especially with all of the proposals in the Bitcoin protocol about different signature schemes, version 2 scripts, with all the different graph roots and tap roots and all sorts of stuff there, that will enable enhanced layer 2, enable enhanced layer 1 privacy, but also enable enhanced layer 2 flexibility. So that, say when you withdraw from an exchange, you buy a little Bitcoin, as you're withdrawing it to your wallet, that same transaction opens a Lightning channel. Or maybe there's Lightning channel factories that can splice in and splice out different channels and things. So just gaining main chain efficiency and also UX improvements over opening channels, and then Lightning Network gives you pretty much the same experience as any other digital payment system. It's near instantaneous. You're fully settled. So that really is what got a lot of people into Bitcoin in the first place, was this instant global payment thing. And that was fine with empty blocks and low fees.
Yeah.
So Lightning really restores that initial wow factor for Bitcoin. And then the main chain continues to be a long-term store of value settlement layer. We talk about this protocol stack. Developing that infrastructure is what I'm most excited about, because it'll be able to absorb the next wave, hopefully without some crazy fee spike. And looking at you, exchanges need to get their house in order as far as being the on-ramp for people into this space. I don't know if I'm excited or not about any sort of atomic swap or cross-chain stuff. I don't see other chains being useful long term in the silver and gold sense. History shows that money's a winner take all technology. Silver, gold, copper have played their role over time, but and maybe the error always comes in when the state mandates a fixed exchange rate, fixed, 10 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold, whatever it is, that defies market logic, and so you have imbalances there, and maybe if those are free to float, then things are fine. But we have the Bitcoin testnet, we have the liquid sidechain that's been launched, that's doing some cool stuff, which probably has better security properties than most of the ICO projects out there. You do face trade-offs with the sidechain, but I'd like to see more people try sidechains as an alternative to completely new chains or just centralized stuff on top of Ethereum or whatever. But 3 years. 3 years, like who can predict that far? Like in 3-year cycles, we've had the Bitcoin only cycle, then the altcoin cycle, then the Ethereum kind of cycle led into the ICO cycle, maybe, and then we saw some forks, and people were like, it's fork season, everybody's going to fork for their new project, and that didn't happen, and we've seen that forks are a disaster, which is good. Maybe it'll be the sidechain cycle next. Who knows? But if that's the case, then that's another bullish case for Bitcoin, because you're not going to build a sidechain on, Doge or whatever. You're going to build a sidechain on Bitcoin. And that just brings more value into Bitcoin and just enhances the value of the main chain. And of course, within the next 3 years, hopefully, Picks and Shovels company will be taking off real big, and, for us at Picks and Shovels, servicing, hedge funds and institutional allocators, fund administrators, things like that. so that if institutional money comes into the space, we're building the tools that will help them make heads and tails of the accounting side of things.
You say if, but I think it's happening.
Right. Yes. There's a lot of institutions out there.
I think they're just being quiet about it right now. I think.
Right.
Or at least, the people who maybe like the heads of these companies or important people in these companies are getting into it personally and seeing what a headache it is, which is good for you guys because you solve the headache.
Right. And what these guys do is they will do one transaction in Bitcoin out of their, $3 billion portfolio. They'll do, $30,000 in Bitcoin and then sit on it and learn about it. And then 2 years later, they'll be like, we've been doing Bitcoin transactions for 2 years. We're thought leaders in the space, which is technically true. One of the other big developments that hopefully will happen is some central bank comes out and says we hold Bitcoin as part of our reserves, because I think that has a domino effect, to the ministers of finance who are listening to this program in developing economies, go ahead and add some Bitcoin at these cheap prices to your reserves, because once one country does it, one central bank does it, then that's a stampede event, and it could be completely out of control at that point.
Right.
As far as because once the central bank says we've got it, then large institutional allocators will say, well, if it's good enough for a central bank, it's good for us, and then other central banks will also get it, which could have massive effects on the price, and also the credibility of the system. So we have potentially that to look forward to in the next 3 years. If I were a central bank, I would wait as long as possible so I could accumulate as much as possible before announcing.
Yeah.
To basically front run the market that's going to happen. So, yeah.
Do you think there will get to be a point? I mean, arguably, you could say that North Korea is doing this already, but like that there will be nationalized mining facilities.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I see mining as a strategic position.
Yeah.
So that as you rely on Bitcoin, you also can ensure that your transactions can't be censored by other nations,
right?
Or nation level actors, and you can do that with not too much of the hash rate, but also if the hash rate is widely distributed among nation state actors, then the chance for collusion is low. Because governments don't really like to work together that closely,
right?
And so they're in a continual state of adversarial relationship, which fits itself perfectly to the mining game, because mining is a zero sum game, and so a lot of states think in zero sum terms, even though economics is not a zero sum game, trade is not a zero sum game. But a lot of them like to think of it that way.
Yeah. This isn't specifically about mining, but when we were talking about running your own node and things like that earlier and not being censored, going through that iterative capital piece, they didn't say it in these terms, but then when they were talking about proof of stake versus proof of work, and it got me thinking like, with proof of work and running your own node, you have just as much say regardless of how much Bitcoin you own. And so to enforce the rules, and I had this picture in my head. It was very cool. Like somebody with one Satoshi has just as much say as somebody with 10 or 100,000 Bitcoins.
Right. Yeah. It's the rules that matter and not the sum that matters. So, a proof of stake system where you stake the actual coin, how is that too much different than the bank oligopoly we have now.
Right.
The big banks have way more say than little banks. And the Fed has the ultimate say over the system, so a hierarchical system is what we have now, and that's what we're trying to escape from.
Okay, well let's move on from that. Let's look out to the future. Let's look out to the distant future. You had a recent article that came out about Bitcoin in space, and well, first of all, you kind of mentioned grad school the last time I had you on, but I don't know how much you went into detail. You were in aerospace engineering program. Can you talk a little bit about the project you were working on? Briefly, I mean, you don't have to go into huge details, but I just think it's cool.
Yeah, so we did a ton of different stuff. I was in grad school probably a little too long. Got my master's in aerospace and then almost got a PhD. And over the course of that time, we worked on orbital mechanics stuff, spacecraft, attitude determination and control, which is how, you say you have the Hubble telescope, it needs to point at a star in the distance very, very accurately for a long period of time. And that's control system stuff and attitude determination to know exactly where it's pointing in the first place. We did low-level robot control, space robot control, and tested it down at NASA Johnson Space Center. And that was super fun. So I've got a little bit of the orbital mechanics background. And you don't have to go to grad school for that. You just need to play Kerbal Space Program. And Kerbal Space Program gives you all the appreciation you need for orbital mechanics, and also for understanding, how this stuff would work in the future. Okay.
So then, but your article then kind of goes into what it might look like as humans kind of breach that interplanetary frontier and move out into space. Like, how do we deal with Bitcoin in that sense when you've got much bigger time delays and things like that? Like, how would we address that?
Right. So the thing about money is that money is the glue that's keeping any sort of market economy together, and any sort of space settlement will need money. And it would be nice for them to have sound money, because if a space colony is going to need all the help it can get. Thinking about it a little further, like how this would actually happen, I mean, the economics of it are very, very stacked against any sort of self-sustaining space colony. It's just so expensive to get stuff into space. And once you get there, there's like nothing there. Like the whole universe outside of the Earth is like designed to kill humans, So it's really hard. But assuming we can get past that startup, say Elon Musk figures it out or whatever, there's enough people going to Mars on a one-way trip, then you need money. And I think Bitcoin should be that money because it's the soundest money we've got. And when you start talking about space, you start talking about the speed of light. So the first issue is the time delay with money. If you're using Bitcoin, time delay basically kills mining outside of the Earth-Moon system. It takes 2.5 seconds for light to reach the moon, or thereabouts, maybe 3 seconds. And 3 seconds is not too much latency to add to a mining operation.
Okay, I want to interrupt you for a second. Do you think we should colonize the moon?
I think the market should decide. I think if it makes sense to be on the moon, we should do it. So here's the thing about the moon. If you can mine material and process material on the surface of the moon, like lithium and magnesium, sort of like lightweight spacecraft metals, and launch them to orbital shipyards in lunar orbit and build ships in lunar orbit, then you can launch them from lunar orbit to the rest of the solar system with much, much, much less energy requirement than going from the surface of the Earth.
Yeah, you don't have to break Earth's gravity to get there.
Yeah. I've heard it said that low Earth orbit is halfway to anywhere in the solar system. It takes 9,600 kilometers per second of delta V to get out of Earth's gravity well and into low Earth orbit, and that much more delta V gets you pretty much anywhere else. So the moon is an amazing staging point for interplanetary exploration, or even sending stuff back to Earth, like mine out on the moon, send it back to Earth if there's some sort of material on the moon that's much more abundant than on the Earth, and the economics work out. It's like, I think we should settle the moon, not necessarily colonize the moon.
Okay.
There is a case to be made for a space telescope in the craters at the poles. There are craters at the poles of the moon that are in perpetual shadow, which would be a really, really, really nice place for a telescope. It could only point at part of the sky, but in no sunlight at all.
Yeah.
And there's no atmosphere on the moon to scatter sunlight into the telescope, so it'd be fantastic. The moon does make sense economically for certain things.
Okay. We can go back now if you wanted to.
Yeah. No, the speed of light. So you've got latency built in. Anywhere you go into space, you have latency relative to being on Earth. Though the speed of light in fiber, optical fiber, is slower than the speed of radio going through space. So there's the potential that you could have faster block propagation bouncing to a low Earth orbit satellite and around the world than you could through the optical fiber network on the planet. Potentially. And if you can stomach 3 seconds of latency or something, you could have mining all the way out at the moon. Now, getting the energy production capabilities and the chip manufacturing capabilities out there to actually do mining is dubious. You can't mine on Mars. So Mars is like 24 minutes away, and so it's like 48-minute round trip in the worst case. That'd be like mining 4 or 5 blocks deep at all times.
Yeah.
So you can simulate mining on Mars now. Just say, I'm going to mine on the 4th block in the chain rather than the latest block.
Yeah.
Miners out there know that that's pretty much suicide.
Yeah, you're never going to catch up.
And the dominant planet will dominate the chain because of this time delay thing. So even if Mars had 30% of the hash rate, it would probably get 0% of the blocks simply due to the time delay. That's not to say you can't use Bitcoin on Mars, even the main chain. You just have to wait a little while to settle to the main chain. Still faster than settling to your, bank.
Yeah.
Business days. But you just add 4 confirmations to the round trip time or something, and you've got 4 blocks to your confirmation level, and you've got confirmed transactions on Mars. The nice thing also, I mentioned Lightning Network, and we'll get to that in a second. Lightning has a lot of back and forth chatter when you're making transactions. Bitcoin, you can broadcast. You can do one way. It's push, right? It's like,
yeah.
I'm pushing this money to a different address. Boom. And you can fire and forget, and you just monitor the blockchain to make sure it went through. So you can settle to the main chain, and you can do that anywhere in the solar system. You just need to get your transaction back to the blockchain, and then get the blockchain back to you. So currently, interplanetary communication data rates are not awesome. There's some pretty, the Mars stuff gets pretty high data rates back to Earth. I think in the multiple megabits per second range. But adding a ton of comm and things will necessitate communication startups. So, start building space antennas, guys, because you need them in a couple hundred years to have a nice relay business.
I think Blockstream's got a plan to go out there.
If you've read the book Fire Upon the Deep,
we've had this conversation
by Werner Vinge, there's a planet called Relay, and they have this giant orbital arrays that do hyperwave transmissions of data around the edge of the galaxy. So it's already been written about in the 80s. Just go build it.
They have their logo. If you look at it, it looks like the view from the back, where when you eject the stage.
Yep.
Somebody mentioned that. Anyway, all right, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So main chain works just fine. You don't have to mine. You do need nodes. And you probably need multiple nodes on Mars, let's say, with independent data paths back to Earth, so that the controller of the satellite dish or the big communications dish can't block the signal from coming in. You have another way of getting the data back to Mars, so you can monitor the blockchain. Once you've got on-chain transactions done and you've waited for those, then you can use Lightning Network in full form locally. And this is huge. This is why Lightning's awesome, because you don't have to go back to the chain. So you're making Bitcoin transactions instantaneously on Mars. And all you have to do is build into the penalty transactions and the time delays. You just build additional delay for the round trip time. Currently, some of those are 24 or 48 hours. You just add 40 minutes to that. Done.
Yeah.
And you can use Lightning Network fully featured on Mars.
So would this be like a Mars Lightning Network, or it'd be the same Lightning Network? The same Lightning Network as on Earth. You
would want to partition the networks because you don't want any hops going between the planets, because the delay is just huge. And there's a lot of back and forth in the protocol. A lot of back and forth. So some of these links will just take forever to negotiate. So you could partition the networks, which would make sense and be fine. It could work. You just need to be okay with huge delays.
Yeah.
And that's, that'd be cool. Like you rebalance, and this is what businesses could do potentially, is just rebalance channels with their terrestrial counterparts, because they have the patience to wait to do these rebalancings. But everyone else just wants to transact locally, basically. And with routing, I don't know exactly how Lightning finds routes for payment, but I think if one leg of that route is going to hop to Earth, you're going to complete the route with local nodes, a bajillion times faster than the other one's going to reply to you from Earth. And so it'll just abort that connection, or abort that routing attempt once you find a payment and make it. So it'll probably handle itself. What else?
Do we need relays between Earth and Mars? Like, do we need something in between to propagate that signal, or is it?
You do need, in the case that Earth and Mars are on opposite sides of the sun, you need some sort of satellite that can relay stuff around the sun, basically. So you'd probably stick that at the L4 and L5 Lagrangian points. Now, I haven't thought it all the way through. I don't know if you should go for a local Martian currency backed by Bitcoin or another chain or not. If you go that route, though, then you will need orbital arbitrage stations. So you're trading Martian, Mars coin versus Earth coin.
You heard it here first. Clark is pumping his Mars coin bags.
Pump my bags.
Arthur, when can we get Mars coin on BitMEX?
When Mars coin. But you would need arbitrage trading venues on orbit, so you can have data from both sides first before the signal propagates all the way through. This is way out there.
Yeah. Light years of it. No.
Light years away. What else? This is my first kind of thinking about the interplanetary frontier, setting this whole thing up. I plan to release 3 or 4 more articles. One about interplanetary trade and the role that Bitcoin would play. One about mining only, and I need to do a lot more research into mining itself to figure out all the economics involved. One about interplanetary war, because talking about that comm stuff, like you need to ensure that your communications can't be blocked off or blockaded from Earth, because if the blockchain is on Earth and not on Mars, well then Earth could shut down those communication channels, so Mars could do no commerce at all, other than Lightning.
Space fork.
Space Force. Space Force. And then the other one, the last one would be on interstellar trade, or interstellar frontier. So like some group of humans is getting on a colony ship to go to the stars. How do they take the blockchain with them? How do you reconcile the blockchain after 100,000 years when they return? That sort of thing.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't know.
So like if say you're on Mars, would you need different I don't know, the value, would it be different than the value on Earth? I mean, I guess it's all subjective, right? Like the free market, the market decides what the value is. Like I'm just thinking like you have a different set of goods available and resources available on Mars than you do on Earth. So the price, I guess, in Bitcoin of a good on Mars would probably be different than Earth. But I guess truthfully, like it would be different in different areas of the Earth as well already. So
yeah,
I just answered my own question. Thank you for standing here while I did that.
Well, the purchasing power would be different, and you're right. The mix of goods and services would be completely different, and price completely different. So like a bottle of water would probably be a lot more money on Mars. The other thing about you colonists thinking about going to Mars with Elon, it could be like camping for a long time. It could be dirty.
Yeah.
It could be nasty. So, just keep that in mind. Like, it's not like
glamorous.
It's not glamorous. I mean, you're stuck in like a tin can. And that's all you've got. You can't go home and shower. It's all you've got. So it could be very, very, very hard for humanity to get off of this rock.
Yeah. Watching clips from the space station makes me claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Like just stuck in a metal tube that separates you from total oblivion. It freaks me out. Oh man, there's something else I was going to ask you. Right now, like travel into space is very highly regulated. We've got SpaceX, which is a private company, arguably based on their government funding, but it's still like their launches and stuff are still very controlled by NASA. Do you see
FAA?
Oh yeah, FAA. But so then they use the government launch pads essentially, right? So, is there a future where some country maybe who gets on a Bitcoin standard, then allows a lot more freedom to launch into space? I know there are like more optimal places on the Earth to launch from to get into orbit, but and sure that probably plays into it, but
well, yeah, I think that the best thing to do would be to have a giant equatorial barge, and you float your rocket out to the equator and launch from the ocean. I don't think the FAA has anything to say what you do in the middle of the Pacific, and some other country could certainly set that up. A U.S. company could also set that up too. The issue I see with other nations doing this is there's only a handful of nations with enough technical know-how, structure of production built up to even support a spacefaring industry. So it would be one of the EU, India, China, Japan, Russia, maybe South Korea. It'd be one of those guys. Would be the main competitor. It's unlikely that this sort of startup happens from some out of the blue.
Antigua.
Yeah. St. Kitts.
Right.
So sorry if you're a spacefaring, you've got space capabilities, and I forgot to list you there, but there's not that many.
Right.
And actually, it would be a huge. I mean, I'm sure the FAA would love.
Is Canada? I know they send
Canada's
astronauts.
a
Do they have
participant.
launch?
I don't think so. I don't think so. They're a participant with the U.S. usually.
Yeah.
I mean, equatorial barge. We've been talking about that forever. I mean, because the equator is the best place to launch for geosynchronous orbits for sure, and other sorts of orbits. It's actually crazy. Like Russia is at a very high. Their launch their launch facilities are very high latitude. And so if they want to launch something to equatorial orbit, they have to do a giant plane change maneuver, which costs a lot of fuel. But the orbit they're on actually places, when you put stuff in that orbit, it actually makes it really, really nice for spying on Washington. Especially the way the orbital precession works out. You can keep a satellite that goes over Washington every 12 hours basically indefinitely when you launch from the latitude of Russia. If we launch from Florida, we have to plane change into something that'll go over Moscow every 12 hours. So, once you learn a little bit about orbital mechanics, you realize that like orbit design is this very, very rich kind of field, and there's lots of nuance there, but you can do really, really cool stuff with it.
I'll put a link in the show notes to 2 resources. There's a video from the Smarter Everyday YouTube channel, and then Seven Eves is a really good book. It's fiction, but it's really good, and it talks a lot about there's a lot of hard like orbital mechanics science in it. And yeah, that was good.
Yep.
All right, we are getting close. You're gonna have to go pretty soon. So, any parting words?
To the moon.
To the moon.
Literally.
Literally to the moon.
Literally to the moon. Hang in there. If you didn't get wrecked in Mt. Gox or any of the other scam exchanges or wrecked on altcoins or whatever, if you're still surviving this thing, just hold on, keep going. Don't get discouraged by the FUD. Boost your intellectual fortitude, your emotional fortitude, and let's see this thing through. We haven't seen the major state attack, but it's probably coming. Just get ready.
Yeah. All right. Twitter @Clark Moody, bitcoin.clarkmoody.com, and what else?
That's it.
All right. Thanks. It's been fun.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for our show today. I hope you guys had fun listening to that as we looked back on the last 10 years of Bitcoin and kind of speculated about the future possibilities. I had a lot of fun recording in person. I would love to do that more often. If that's something you guys would like to hear more of on this show, I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to go check out my Tallycoin page. It would be a lot more feasible for me to do in-person recordings if I had the right equipment. So if you check out Tallycoin, TALLYCO.in/Bottomshelf BTC, just like my Twitter handle. There's a place on there where you can donate towards better recording equipment. I'm saving up for it, but yeah, you can feel free to help that process along. Because that's something I want to get more into, is being able to do more of these in-person recordings. It's just the dynamic of the conversation is different, and it's a lot of fun. So feel free to help me out there. I know you guys have heard me talk about my patch site, bitcoinmeritbadge.com, where you can kind of get some fun commemorative patches and just cool ways to show off your skills and your love of Bitcoin. But what you might not know about is Patreon, our manufacturer. They do a lot of great work. Obviously, that's who I use to produce these patches. They do all kinds of cool custom embroidered designs. There's several different edges you can get. There's a number of different backings you can get for these patches. It's kind of whatever you can dream up, they can probably do. And they'll work with you to make sure that your colors and the size of your patch and everything is legible and will look good. So highly recommend checking them out at embroidered-patches.uk. That's embroidered-patches.uk. Great guys and girls over there at Patreon that will help you get that special custom patch for your event or your airsoft team, or you and your friends, or whatever you want. So check them out. And I haven't really talked about it much on the show, but if you've been paying attention to this proof of keys thing that's going around that Trace Mayer kind of brought up, the idea is basically to on the 3rd every year of January, if you have any Bitcoin on an exchange, you pull it off into a wallet that you control. Essentially, the idea is to make the exchanges prove that they have the keys, prove that they're not fractionally reserving Bitcoin. And so I highly encourage you guys to, if you have anything on an exchange, whether that's Coinbase or Gemini or Cash App or whatever you're using, spin up an Electrum wallet or Samurai or whatever else you use, or just Bitcoin Core wallet, and transfer that over. Make them prove. And then if you want to have it back on there, put it back on there on the 4th. I don't care. You do what you want to do. That's not what I recommend, but if that's really where you want to keep it. But the whole point is just to make them prove that they actually have the Bitcoin. So proof of keys, January 3rd. That should be today if you're listening on the day that this comes out. And then lastly, follow me on Twitter or share the episodes of the show with anybody you know. If you have recommendations or requests, hit me up. Like I said, on Twitter, Bottomshelf BTC. My DMs are always open. And I guess that's it for this week. For Bottomshelf Bitcoin, I'm Josh Humphrey. Thanks for listening.